doctors spreading medical lies, professors endorsing hate, loving parents destroying their children. These aren't stupid people. That's exactly why this is terrifying. What if stupidity isn't what you think it is? Not a lack of intelligence, not poor education, not low IQ scores or failed exams? What if stupidity is something far more sinister? A force capable of hijacking brilliant minds and turning them into instruments of destruction. Picture this: a renowned scientist, multiple degrees from elite universities, decades of peer-reviewed research. One day, he starts believing and spreading dangerous misinformation. Not because he's lost his intelligence. His IQ hasn't dropped a single point. But something inside him has broken. A compassionate teacher. 20 years shaping young minds, beloved by students, known for her kindness. When she begins endorsing ideologies that contradict everything she once stood for. Ideologies that would harm the very children she dedicated her life to protect. A loving father. He would die for his children without hesitation. Yet he starts making decisions that put them directly in harm's way. Decisions that, to an outside observer, seem almost deliberately destructive. These aren't bad people. They aren't villains twirling mustaches in dark rooms. They aren't sociopaths or narcissists or criminals. They are intelligent, educated, well-meaning individuals who have fallen victim to something most people don't even know has a name. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. The greatest threat to human civilization isn't evil people doing evil things. We know how to recognize evil. We've built systems to contain it. We write stories about defeating it. No, the greatest threat is ordinary people who have simply stopped thinking. This isn't philosophical speculation. In 1961, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram conducted what would become one of the most disturbing experiments in human history at Yale University. Here's how it worked. Ordinary volunteers were brought into a laboratory. They were told they'd be helping with a study about learning and memory. A man in a white lab coat, the authority figure, instructed them to administer electric shocks to another person whenever that person answered a question incorrectly. The shocks weren't real. The learner receiving them was an actor. But the volunteers didn't know this. As the experiment progressed, the volunteers were told to increase the voltage. They could hear the learner screaming in the next room, begging them to stop, crying out in agony. Eventually, the screams stopped altogether, suggesting the learner had either passed out or worse. The volunteers were visibly distressed. Many of them protested. They sweated. They trembled. They asked to stop. But when the man in the white coat calmly insisted they continue, most of them did. 65% of participants administered shocks they believed could be lethal. That means if you're watching this with two friends, statistically, at least one of you would have kept pressing that button. Not because they were sadists, not because they enjoyed causing pain, but because they had temporarily given up their ability to think for themselves to an authority figure. These were normal people, teachers, accountants, salesmen, parents, people you might pass on the street without a second glance, and that's precisely what makes this so disturbing. Because if you're watching this right now, thinking, I would never do that, I need you to understand something. This isn't happening to other people. It's happening to people exactly like you and me, every single day. The only difference is that most of us never realize when we've crossed that invisible line, when we've stopped thinking for ourselves, when we've handed over our minds to forces we barely understand. This phenomenon, this surrender of independent thought, was witnessed in its most extreme form decades before Milgram's experiment. It was observed by a man sitting in a Nazi prison cell, waiting to be executed for his role in a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and what he discovered about the nature of human stupidity would change everything we thought we knew about how civilizations collapse. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not your typical philosopher. He didn't spend his days in ivory towers, contemplating abstract ideas over cups of tea. He wasn't disconnected from the world, analyzing humanity from a safe distance. Bonhoeffer was born in 1906 into an intellectual German family. His father was a prominent psychiatrist and neurologist, a man of science who believed in the power of rational thought. Young Dietrich grew up surrounded by books, ideas, and the unshakable conviction that education and reason could solve humanity's problems. He became a Lutheran pastor. Brilliant, charismatic, deeply committed to his faith and to the German people he served. And then, in the 1930s, he watched his entire worldview shatter. As the Nazi Party rose to power, Bonhoeffer witnessed something that defied everything he believed about human nature. He watched as his fellow Germans, educated, cultured, religious people, began supporting policies that contradicted everything they claimed to hold sacred. These weren't ignorant peasants being manipulated by clever propaganda. These were professors who had dedicated their lives to truth, doctors who had sworn to do no harm, clergy members who preached love and compassion every Sunday morning. And yet, one by one, they fell in line. Bonhoeffer saw colleagues he respected begin parroting Nazi talking points as if the words weren't coming from their own mouths, but from somewhere else entirely. He watched intellectuals twist themselves into logical pretzels to justify atrocities. He observed religious leaders blessing policies that would lead to the systematic murder of millions. How? How could this happen? For years, Bonhoeffer struggled to understand. He participated in the resistance. He helped Jews escape Germany. He joined a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, knowing full well it would likely cost him his life. And in 1943, the Gestapo finally caught up with him. It was from his prison cell, facing almost certain death, that Bonhoeffer finally put into words what he had witnessed. In letters smuggled to friends and family, he formulated what would become one of the most haunting observations about human nature ever written. "Against stupidity," he wrote, "we are defenseless. Not ignorance, not malice, stupidity. Neither protests nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears." But here's what made Bonhoeffer's insight truly revolutionary. He recognized that stupidity, in this sense, is far more dangerous than evil. Think about it. Evil people know they're doing wrong. That knowledge creates internal conflict, guilt, shame. Eventually, it leads to mistakes, exposure, and breakdown. Evil, Bonhoeffer noted, always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion. We can fight evil because evil knows what it is. But stupidity? Stupidity believes it's doing good. The person caught in functional stupidity doesn't feel like they're being manipulated. They feel righteous. They feel certain. They feel like they're the ones who see the truth, while everyone else is blind. And that certainty makes them absolutely immune to correction. You can present evidence. They dismiss it. You can appeal to logic. They reject it. You can show them the consequences of their beliefs. They explain them away. Because the moment someone gives up their ability to think for themselves, they stop processing information rationally. They process it defensively. Every contradiction becomes an attack to repel, not a fact to consider. Bonhoeffer observed this with chilling precision. He wrote that when speaking to someone in this state, one virtually feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans, catchphrases, and the like that have taken possession of him. Have you ever had a conversation like that? Where you realize, midway through, that you're not talking to a person anymore, but to a collection of talking points? Where every response seems pre-programmed, where no matter what you say, and they loop back to the same rehearsed positions, That's not a failure of intelligence. That's possession by stupidity. But Bonhoeffer pushed even further. He realized something that most people miss even today. Stupidity isn't a personal defect. It's not something people are born with. It's something that happens to them. When Bonhoeffer used the word stupidity, he wasn't talking about low intelligence. He was describing something far more dangerous, something we might call functional stupidity or willful ignorance, a state where perfectly intelligent people voluntarily shut down their critical thinking abilities. And here's the crucial insight that makes his theory so unsettling. This isn't about individual weakness, it's about systemic pressure. Bonhoeffer wrote, "The fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not blind us to the fact that he is not independent." Read that again. Stubborn, but not independent. The person who has surrendered to functional stupidity appears confident, certain, unshakable in their convictions. They argue passionately. They defend their positions aggressively. From the outside, they look like the very definition of independent thought. But they're not thinking at all. They're echoing. When you truly engage with them, when you push past the surface, you discover that their words aren't their own. They've been colonized by slogans, catchphrases, and ideological frameworks that they've absorbed from the groups they belong to. The person is still there, technically, but their mind has been occupied by something else. This is why Bonhoeffer argued that stupidity is fundamentally a sociological problem, not a psychological one. People don't become functionally stupid in isolation. They become stupid when they surrender their individual identity to a group, a movement, or an ideology. The need to belong, one of the deepest human drives, overrides the capacity for rational analysis. Think about what this means. Those in power don't need to actively suppress information anymore. They don't need secret police burning books or censors reviewing every publication. All they need to do is create conditions where processing information honestly becomes socially costly. When agreeing with the group earns you acceptance, praise, and belonging, and questioning the group earns you isolation, ridicule, and exile, most people will stop questioning. Not because they're stupid in the traditional sense, but because belonging feels more important than being right. And here's the darkest part of Bonhoeffer's observation. People caught in functional stupidity don't feel like victims. They feel like heroes. They believe they're doing good. They believe they're on the right side of history. They believe that everyone who disagrees with them is either misguided or malicious. This makes them not only resistant to correction, but actively hostile to anyone who tries. The malicious person knows they're doing wrong. You can sometimes reach them through guilt, consequences, or self-interest. But the functionally stupid person believes they're righteous. They'll fight to defend their intellectual prison because they think it's a fortress of truth. And Bonhoeffer didn't just theorize about this. He watched it happen in real time as an entire nation of intelligent, educated people transformed into willing instruments of one of history's greatest horrors. But what he couldn't have known, what he never lived to see, is that scientists would later prove him right in ways even more disturbing than he imagined. Everything Bonhoeffer figured out by watching Nazis, scientists have since proven in laboratories. And the results should terrify you. Your brain is not your friend. It wasn't built to find truth. It was built to keep you alive long enough to have children. That's it. Truth was never part of the deal. Here's what that means in practice. 100,000 years ago, your ancestor heard a rustle in the grass. He had two choices: assume it's a tiger and run, or stop to investigate and gather evidence. The ones who investigated got eaten. The ones who ran survived long enough to become your great-great-great-grandparents. So your brain learned a lesson it never forgot. Speed beats accuracy, every time. But there's a second lesson your brain learned that's even more dangerous. Being right matters less than being accepted. In a small tribe, the person who constantly questioned the group's beliefs wasn't seen as a brilliant, independent thinker. They were seen as a threat, a troublemaker, someone who might tear the community apart. And troublemakers got exiled. Exile meant death. So your brain developed a simple rule. When in doubt, agree with the group. Belonging equals survival. Questioning equals danger. That rule is still running in your head right now. Every time you scroll through social media, every time you nod along with your friends, every time you feel that uncomfortable twinge when someone challenges a belief you share with your community, that's not wisdom. That's 100,000 years of survival programming telling you to shut up and fit in. In the 1950s, psychologist Leon Festinger conducted groundbreaking research on what he called cognitive dissonance, the mental pain we feel when we encounter information that contradicts our beliefs. What he found was troubling. When people are presented with facts that challenge their worldview, their brains don't simply evaluate the new information objectively. Instead, they experience something like physical pain. The same regions of the brain that activate during physical distress light up when our beliefs are threatened. And what do we do when something causes pain? We fight to make it stop. This is why presenting evidence to someone caught in functional stupidity often backfires. You're not just challenging their ideas, you're causing them pain. And their brain will do whatever it takes to relieve that pain, even if it means rejecting reality. But cognitive dissonance alone doesn't explain the mass surrender Bonhoeffer witnessed. For that, we need to understand the terrifying power of group conformity. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted a series of experiments that seem almost too disturbing to be true. Here's the setup. A volunteer is brought into a room with what appears to be a group of other volunteers. In reality, everyone else is an actor, following a script. The group is shown a series of lines and asked a simple question. Which line matches the original? The answer is obvious, unmistakable. A child could get it right. But one by one, the actors deliberately give the wrong answer. When the volunteer's turn comes, they face a choice. Do they trust their own eyes? Or do they go along with the group? 75% of participants conform to the obviously wrong answer at least once. Let that satisfaction sink in. 3 out of 4 people will deny the evidence of their own senses rather than contradict a group of strangers. Now imagine how much more powerful this effect becomes when the group isn't strangers, but friends, family, colleagues, the people you love and respect, the community that gives your life meaning. When everyone you trust believes something, questioning that belief doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels like betrayal. This is the psychological trap Bonhoeffer identified, and we've fallen into it over and over throughout history. The Salem witch trials weren't conducted by evil people. They were conducted by devout community members who genuinely believed they were protecting their neighbors from dark forces. The Red Scare of the 1950s wasn't driven by malicious actors. It was driven by patriotic Americans who sincerely thought they were defending democracy from communist infiltration. In each case, intelligent, educated people abandoned critical thinking because the social cost of questioning the consensus was too high. And if you think this is ancient history, if you think we've evolved beyond this, I need to tell you about what's happening right now. Bonhoeffer witnessed Nazi propaganda spreading through newspapers and radio broadcasts, crude tools by today's standards, mass messaging that hit everyone the same way. We're facing something 100 times worse. The systems we've built don't just broadcast propaganda. They've industrialized functional stupidity at a scale Bonhoeffer could never have imagined. Let's start with something that seems disconnected, but is absolutely central to understanding our modern crisis. Economic stress. When people are working multiple jobs just to survive, when they're drowning in debt, when they're constantly worried about healthcare and housing and whether they'll be able to retire, something happens to their ability to think critically. They don't have the mental energy for it. Economists call this rational ignorance. It becomes more efficient for overwhelmed individuals to remain uninformed about difficult issues than to invest the time and energy required for genuine understanding. Think about your own life. When you're exhausted, stressed, running from one obligation to the next, do you have the energy to carefully evaluate every piece of information you encounter? To research claims before accepting them? To question the assumptions underlying the news you consume? Of course not. None of us do. So we take shortcuts. We accept the positions of our trusted sources without examination. We adopt the views of our group without question. This isn't a moral failing. It's a survival strategy. But here's where it gets truly sinister. There are industries, massive, powerful industries, that profit directly from this dynamic. Social media platforms make billions of dollars when users react emotionally rather than think critically. Their algorithms are literally designed to hijack your attention by triggering outrage, fear, and tribalism. A 2018 study by MIT researchers found that false information spread 6 times faster than true information on social platforms. 6 times faster. Why? Because false information is designed to feel good in ways that messy truth can't compete with. The truth is complicated, nuanced, full of ugly compromises and inconvenient facts. But misinformation? Misinformation tells you exactly what you want to hear. It confirms your worldview. It identifies clear villains and simple solutions. It makes you feel smart, righteous, and part of a community of people who get it. And every time you engage with content that confirms your existing beliefs, the algorithm learns. It feeds you more of the same. It builds a personalized echo chamber around you, what I call intellectual quicksand. The more you consume, the deeper you sink. And you don't even notice it happening because everything you see confirms that you're right. Have you ever noticed how your social media feed seems to show you exactly what you want to see? That's not an accident. That's the architecture of chosen ignorance in action. But we're entering territory far more dangerous than biased algorithms. We've gone from Nazi propaganda to social media echo chambers, and now we're entering the age of artificial intelligence that can fabricate reality itself on deepfakes that can put words in anyone's mouth. AI systems that know exactly which psychological buttons to push for each individual user. Bots that can simulate genuine human conversation and spread coordinated disinformation at scale. We're not just fighting human manipulation anymore. We're fighting systems designed by artificial intelligence to exploit our mental weak points with surgical precision. Every click, every pause, every emotional reaction you have is being analyzed and weaponized against your ability to think for yourself. We saw this play out in real time during COVID-19. Doctors, people who spent years learning to evaluate evidence, began sharing debunked theories about vaccines and treatments. Engineers with demonstrated analytical abilities became convinced of elaborate conspiracies. Lawyers trained in logical reasoning abandoned that training entirely. These weren't failures of intelligence. They were failures of intellectual independence under unprecedented pressure. When people are scared, stressed, and overwhelmed, when the volume of information becomes impossible to process, the brain seeks shelter. It latches onto explanations that reduce complexity. It finds communities that provide certainty. And our modern systems are designed to provide exactly that shelter, exactly that certainty, even when it's built on lies. So we're fighting against millions of years of human evolution, against algorithms worth billions of dollars, against economic pressures that steal our mental energy, against AI systems that know us better than we know ourselves. The game is rigged against us. How do we possibly fight back? Bonhoeffer called it costly grace, the willingness to think for yourself even when it hurts. But let's be honest, that sounds nice on paper. In reality, you're fighting your own brain chemistry, economic exhaustion, and algorithms designed by the smartest engineers on the planet. You need weapons. Here's the first one, and it's going to feel wrong. Once a week, find the smartest person who disagrees with you and actually listen to them. Not some idiot straw man you can easily dismiss. The best version of the opposing argument. The one that makes you uncomfortable. The one that makes you think, wait, that's actually a good point. If your beliefs are true, they'll survive that test. If they can't survive contact with a good counterargument, you need to know that now, not later when it matters. Here's the second weapon. Ask yourself a question that most people never ask. What would change my mind? Pick something you're certain about, something that feels obviously true. Now ask, what evidence, if it existed, would make me reconsider? If you can't answer that question, if there's literally nothing that could change your mind, you're not holding a belief anymore. A belief is holding you. Third weapon. This one takes 60 seconds. Before you share anything online, stop. Just for 1 minute. Verify it from a source you didn't find through the same algorithm that showed you the original. That tiny pause breaks the cycle. The platforms want you to react while you're angry, while you're scared, while your critical thinking is offline. That 60 seconds is an act of sabotage against a system designed to hijack your mind. And the fourth weapon might be the hardest one. Learn to say 3 words that our culture has trained us to fear. I don't know. We're supposed to have opinions about everything. Social media punishes uncertainty. Confidence, even false confidence, gets rewarded. Saying, I don't know, feels like weakness. But here's the truth. Every time you admit you don't know something, you're exercising the exact mental muscle that functional stupidity wants to destroy. You're proving that you're still in control of your own mind, that you haven't been colonized by certainty, that you're still thinking. These individual weapons matter, but they're not enough. The systems that manufacture stupidity are too powerful to be defeated by individual willpower alone. We also need structural changes. We need to force social media platforms to show us exactly how they're shaping what we see, to reveal the invisible hand that's curating our reality. We need to teach people how to spot bullshit, starting in childhood and continuing throughout life. We need to design online spaces that reward intellectual humility over tribal certainty. And perhaps most importantly, we need economic policies that reduce the stress and fear that make people vulnerable to intellectual shortcuts in the first place. When people aren't constantly worried about survival, they have more mental energy for careful thinking about difficult questions. When they're not exhausted by multiple jobs and crushing debt, they can engage with hard problems rather than retreating to comfortable certainties. The fight against functional stupidity isn't just a personal battle, it's a structural one, and it's one of the most important fights of our time. But knowing how to resist isn't enough. You need to understand what's truly at stake if you don't. Dietrich Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for refusing to surrender his intellectual independence. On April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, just days before he would have been liberated, the Nazis executed him by hanging. According to a fellow prisoner who witnessed his final moments, Bonhoeffer's last words were, "This is the end for me, the beginning of life." He died defending something most people don't even realize they've lost, the ability to think for themselves. Bonhoeffer understood that when people stop thinking independently, they stop being fully human. They become, in his words, puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. His sacrifice wasn't just about political resistance to a specific regime. It was about defending the very possibility of human thought. And this brings us to his final challenge, one that's even more urgent today than when he wrote it from his prison cell. Who stands fast when the pressure to conform is overwhelming, when thinking independently requires courage, when the cost of truth is higher than the price of comfortable lies, when everyone around you has accepted the easy certainty that requires no thought? Who stands fast? The answer isn't found in superior intelligence or education. Bonhoeffer watched as the most educated people in Germany surrendered first. The answer is found in daily choices, in choosing curiosity rather than certainty, in seeking truth rather than comfort, in thinking carefully rather than reacting quickly. These aren't heroic acts. They're ordinary practices that become extraordinary only when everyone around you has stopped doing them. Here's the uncomfortable truth I want you to sit with. We are all susceptible to functional stupidity. Every single one of us. The moment we think we're immune, the moment we look at others falling into ideological traps and think, that could never be me, we've already begun to succumb. The price of intellectual freedom is eternal vigilance, not against external enemies, against our own tendency to stop thinking when thinking becomes difficult. The tragedy is that intellectual surrender often feels like liberation. Thinking is hard work. It's uncomfortable to hold contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time. It's painful to admit you might be wrong about something important. But Bonhoeffer argued that this discomfort is the price of remaining human. In a world that profits from our intellectual surrender, choosing to think for ourselves becomes a radical act. So here's my challenge to you. This week, find one belief you hold strongly, something you feel certain about, something that seems obviously true, and spend 30 minutes researching the best arguments against it, not to torture yourself, not to become paralyzed by doubt, but to practice the kind of intellectual courage that Bonhoeffer died defending. If your belief survives honest scrutiny, you'll hold it with more confidence than before. If it doesn't survive, you'll have learned something valuable about the difference between conviction and truth. Think of critical thinking like physical exercise. It's uncomfortable at first. Your mental muscles burn, your certainties ache, but those muscles atrophy if they are not used. And the cost of letting them atrophy is nothing less than your humanity. The next time you find yourself absolutely certain about something hard to understand, the next time you catch yourself dismissing contradictory evidence without consideration, the next time you feel the comfort of having all the answers, remember Bonhoeffer's warning. Functional stupidity doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispers that you already know everything you need to know. And in that moment of recognition, you have a choice. Will you surrender your mind for the comfort of certainty? Or will you choose the more difficult path of intellectual independence? Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, evidence over emotion, careful thought over quick reaction, you're not just protecting your own mind. You're defending the very possibility of human wisdom in an age of artificial stupidity. The future of human dignity may depend on how we collectively answer Bonhoeffer's challenge. So let me ask you directly, what is one belief you're willing to question this week? Think about it. Really think about it. Then share this with someone who isn't afraid to think deeply, even when it's uncomfortable. Because in a world designed to profit from our intellectual surrender, the simple act of thinking carefully becomes the most important form of resistance we have. And ask yourself, as Bonhoeffer asked from his prison cell, when everyone else has stopped thinking, will you be one who stands fast?